A reading from Mark 1, 21 through 28. Hear what God's Spirit is saying to you. They went to Capernaum, and when the Sabbath came, he entered the synagogue and taught. They were astounded at his teaching, for he taught them as one having authority, and not as the scribes. Just then, there was in their synagogue a man with an unclean spirit, and he cried out, "What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." But Jesus rebuked him, saying, "Be silent and come out of him." And the unclean spirit, convulsing him and crying with a loud voice, came out of him. They were all amazed, and they kept on asking one another, "What is this? A new teaching with authority. He commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him." At once his fame began to spread throughout the surrounding region of Galilee. Here is the reading of words that give us insight on God. May God grant us wisdom and courage for interpretation.
So I was sitting in a coffee shop preparing for the sermon this week, and Shauna sent me a text, and she said, "What are you going to preach about on Sunday?" And I replied back, "Exorcism," with a smiley face. And she, in her characteristic manner, responded only with an emoji, no words, and it was a smiley face with green projectile vomit. Admit it, when Carrie was reading this, you were thinking about The Exorcist, weren't you? At least I was. And I think the reason for that is because most of us, I'm assuming, probably haven't had any experience with this in our own life. The closest that we've had is a film. And Hollywood has made millions playing on the fears of possession and the demonic. That's where we'd prefer that it stay, isn't it? In the films. What's it doing in the Bible? What's Jesus doing performing these exorcisms? We'd rather skip over it. We'd rather go to something like the Sermon on the Mount or go to some parables. But the problem is, in the Gospel of Mark, there's a lot less talk and a lot more action, as the saying goes, and so it's harder to just skip over these. And in fact, there are a lot of exorcisms in Mark. And so I'll admit that whenever I first read this, I thought, I'm not touching that. There's no way I'm going there. But then I thought, if this makes me a little uncomfortable, if it's a little odd, then there are probably other folks who find this uncomfortable and find this a little odd. So maybe I ought to talk about it. So here we go. We've been working our way through the Gospel of Mark this year, and Jesus has been baptized. He's been tested in the wilderness. He's called his first disciples. But this is his first public act of ministry in the Gospel of Mark. He stands up and he teaches in the synagogue, and apparently that's pretty well received. And just then, and notice this whenever you read through the Gospel of Mark, there's a lot of immediacy. There's a lot of just then, immediately, right now. So just then, a demoniac stands up, a man possessed by unclean spirits. And it's interesting to note that this spirit is the first one who recognizes who Jesus is in this Gospel. Not even John the Baptist knew who Jesus was in this Gospel. The Spirit's the first one who knows who Jesus is. And the Spirit says, "I know you. You're the Holy One of God. What are you going to do to me?" And so Jesus exorcises this demon, and the man begins to convulse, and there's a loud scream. It doesn't say anything about his head turning or projectile vomit, but it doesn't sound very pleasant. And the spirit leaves him, and Jesus becomes famous for this. People start to talk about this. And then he starts going around doing exorcisms and healings. Now contrast this with Jesus' inaugural sermon in the Gospel of Luke. In the Gospel of Luke, Jesus again stands up in the synagogue, but this time we know what he's preaching about. He pulls out the scroll of Isaiah and he says, I've come to proclaim the year of the Lord's Jubilee. I've come to bring good news to the poor, release to the captives, recovery of sight to the blind. And then this is so radical that the people in the synagogue want to throw him off the cliff. This is different in the Gospel of Mark. Here, he's performing this powerful act of exorcism. What do we make of this? Is this simply something that Jesus does, going around and performing exorcisms and healings to prove who he is, to prove that he's the Son of God? Is that the purpose of this? Or is there something else going on here? Well, like I said, there are several accounts of exorcisms in the Gospel of Mark. And so this is just the very first one, and so it's short and we don't get a lot of detail. So I thought it might be helpful to skip forward a few chapters in the Gospel of Mark and read to you another story about another exorcism that I think sheds some light. And let me warn you, this one's even odder. Jesus and his disciples came to the other side of the lake, that is across the Sea of Galilee, to the region of the Gerasenes. As soon as Jesus got out of the boat, a man possessed by an evil spirit came out of the tombs, so he's isolated from the rest of society. This man lived among the tombs, and no one was ever strong enough to restrain him, even with a chain. He'd been secured many times with leg irons and chains, but he broke the chains and smashed the leg irons. No one was tough enough to control him. Night and day, in the tombs and the hills, he would howl and cut himself with stones. When he saw Jesus from far away, he ran and knelt before him, shouting, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? Swear to God that you won't torture me." He said this because Jesus had already commanded him, "Unclean spirit, come out of the man." Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" He responded, "Legion is my name, because we are many." They pleaded with Jesus not to send them out of that region. Now there was a large herd of pigs that was feeding on the hillside nearby, and they said, "Send us into the pigs. Let us go into the pigs." Jesus gave them permission. So the unclean spirits left the man and went into the pigs. Then the herd of about 2,000 pigs rushed down the cliff and into the lake and drowned. Those who tended the pigs ran away and told the story in the city and in the countryside. People came to see what had happened. They came to Jesus and saw the man who used to be demon-possessed. They saw the very man who had been filled with many demons sitting there fully dressed and completely sane, and they were filled with awe. Those who had actually seen what happened to the demon-possessed man told the others about the pig. Then they pleaded with Jesus to leave their region. I bet that's a text that doesn't come up in your daily devotional readings very often, does it? So Jesus crosses the Sea of Galilee. He's now in Gentile territory, and he sees this man by himself. This man is isolated from the rest of society. His web of relationships have been disconnected. It says that he's howling into the night, that he's cutting himself with stones. And so this may not seem like an act of compassion, but perhaps striving to do the most compassionate thing that they can, his friends and family have locked him in chains, probably trying to keep him from hurting himself or someone else. No one can restrain him, nor are they going to try. So I think that this has obvious parallels in our society with folks who are struggling with mental illness. This was, of course, a pre-scientific age before that they could talk about any of this. And the part that I think speaks to this struggle with mental illness is this sense of isolation. And I think folks who are struggling with mental illness often feel a sense of isolation. They feel like they're disconnected from other relationships, especially since there has been such a stigma around mental illness in our society. Things are getting better and people are able to break the silence more and more, but there are a lot of people who have to suffer in silence and live in fear. I think it also speaks to the struggle to love one who struggles with mental illness, to want to be there in the midst of that, yet not know quite what to do and feel powerless. I think on the one hand, on the one level, there's a relevancy here. And yet I think there's another level here as well. And we find that as we keep reading this passage. So this man comes up to Jesus and he gets down on his knees and begs. And at first we think Jesus is talking to the man. But quickly we realize, no, he's talking to the spirit within the man. And at first we think it's just one spirit, but then Jesus asks for the name. And they reply, "My name is Legion, for we are many." Okay. And then there are these pigs, and Legion says, "Don't expel us from the region. Let us leave this man and possess the pigs." And so Jesus says, "Okay." And so they leave the man and they possess these pigs, and then they run off the side of a cliff, they fall into the water, and they drown. We don't know exactly what the demon to pig ratio was, but I have a suggestion. I think it was 3-1. And here's why. In the ancient world, legion only meant one thing. A legion was the basic unit in the Roman army and consisted of about 6,000 soldiers. So when this demon says his name is Legion, this is a code, right, for talking about the Romans. Scholar Greg Carrie suggests that in Galilee, where Jesus and the man possessed by demons both lived, that in Galilee, the people there, the land, was possessed by Roman imperialism, as this man was possessed by a legion of demons. Moreover, in ancient literature, there's this common depiction of Romans coming forth from the sea and then being driven back into the sea. Furthermore, pigs were associated with Gentiles, right? Because Jews didn't eat pork. So here you're getting a message that the Roman Gentile pigs are being driven back into the ocean where they belong. So you see, there's a socio-political message here as well that would have been crystal clear to the people who were reading it, but isn't to us because we're so disconnected. So, you know what? The more I think about this, the more I talk about it, I kind of like this passage about exorcism, about demons. Because you see, Jesus exercised exorcism as a tool to free people from their own personal afflictions and from social exploitation. And by the way, did you notice that he did this for free? Did you notice that he served people with pre-existing conditions? Did you notice that? Maybe we could highlight this passage and send it to people in Congress. What do you think? I kind of like this. I like this. Jesus exercised exorcism to speak words of hope to people who were in need. Yeah, I like this so much that I think maybe we could exercise a little exorcism in our lives. Maybe we could exercise exorcism. We could use it as a tool for hope. We could break the silence on mental illness. We could make a commitment to stand in solidarity with those who are suffering. We could speak the truth and love to the principalities and the powers. Yes, I like that. So as we prepare to go forth in a few moments, let's go forth ready to exercise exorcism out in the world. May it be so. Amen. Amen.